You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
It's going to crash, and it's going to fall pretty hard because markets are ruled right now by fear.
I don't think my consulting clients are going to arm my CV, so...
Who are your consulting clients?
I don't believe I have to discuss that with you.
Investors and the big money, the smart money.
My host, auctioneer is here at the bank and the legal firm that it hired.
And they are investors,
an auction.
the big money, the smart money.
Foreclosing my house and not throwing me and my family out onto the street.
They say it was destroyed from the inside out.
And as a man that lives inside this home here behind me, dropping pieces of to dumping it out the whole street. The backyard turned into a garbage.
And this is the worst and most homeless spring. It has been for years. The trees are dead. The water's not running. It's just a mess, a total mess.
Now, we spoke to one of the renters of a home that is also going to be foreclosed, and she said that the homeowner came up literally
Can't testimony by taking full responsibility for some of the downfall which occurred on your watch. But there are some concerns that I want to get to. As you know, American taxpayer, many of them, our constituents, we just passed legislation giving $700 billion to President Wall Street. One complaint I've heard over and over again from my constituents is that there seems to be a complete lack of accountability. They see Wall Street executives like you. It's not
I took a very strong position on the issue of derivatives.
Wouldn't in a sense that be closer to what these packages were, where you had a higher risk, no down payment, and the only way the loans would get paid back was A, they had to stay the same or go up, and in some cases, if they didn't go up, people couldn't have made the payments anyway, and yet they got a high rate. Isn't it the fundamental actual underpinning of these documents that should never have gotten a AAA rating, separate from the question of conflict?
No.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste.
Why do we, the 99%, for ones who lose our homes, who are laid off from our jobs, see our pensions frozen and taxes raised whenever financial crisis hits, continue to be complicit in a neoliberal capitalist system we know to be inherently corrupt, unfair, and historically prone to failure? After so many negative instances, the most recent example being in 2008, what is it that keeps our faith in Milton Friedman's ideal, that the Anglo-American free market is the best economic model, a provider of equality to all under it, and best left untouched? We have identified three main causes for our continued coupling to capitalism. First of them is the incestuous crossover between the right-wing financial sector and national government, and the subsequent elimination of left-wing politics.
In recent years, the exchange of money and power between public officials and investment banks has become a mounting problem, particularly in the US. Political campaigns are disproportionately fueled by the contributions of financial figureheads. Monetary endorsements made by institutions like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, for example, to presidential candidates dwarf the donations made by the public. One can ask them, who does the government, our trusted elected officials, truly represent, the voters or the donors? Of course, such is the nature of the finance industry. Institutions expect a return should their bet be successful. Government positions, therefore, have increasingly been given to past directors and executives of financial firms. Individuals who often still have monetary stakes in their old company end up governing them. This is what one calls a conflict of interest. This phenomenon is crucial to the continuation of neoliberal capitalism. Because of it, we are often at the policy-making mercy of a few individuals who may not be interested in pursuing a system that offers more stability or equality, and instead keeps the status quo of disproportionate wealth.
Our second cause is rooted in history. According to the ideal, the way the capitalist system should work is that when capitalists make huge profits, they reap those benefits. When they make losses, though, it should be tough luck. In the neoliberal Western world, however, there has been a long history of governments propping up capitalism whenever it falters. From as early as 1792, the United States federal government has exercised its power to bail out those in debt. The Great Depression of 1929, for instance, is perhaps the most well-known intervention for its precedent-setting bailouts and rescue programs. When the capitalist system faltered in 2008, Keynesian methods of resolution, such as cutting interest rates, getting money to the failing banks, cutting taxes, and engaging in direct job creation, were once again employed. The Emergency Economic Stabilization Act was passed to allow the Treasury to spend up to $700 billion to buy assets and supply cash directly to the banks that were in trouble. Time and time again, the powers that be have stepped in to rescue the capitalist system, restoring consumer confidence in the market and reasserting Frederick Jameson's belief that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Doing so, however, has precluded any natural evolution that may have come from the system failing. Though it might save people's hard-earned savings in the short term, it ensures the boom-bust cycle of free market capitalism continues on, primed to strike again in the future.
Thirdly, we can turn the investigative gaze inwards. Of course, it's easy to blame greedy bankers, conflicted politicians, and historical precedent for the vampiric quality of the capitalist system. There are other more theoretical reasons, however, for why we have accommodated ourselves to the dominance of capitalism and limited our hopes to contain its worst excesses. As Zizek implies in regard to communism, for an individual to admit to the complete failure of the system is to acknowledge the complete failure of his or her own life too. Perhaps then, as typical neoliberal consumers, we readily participate within the capitalist system to maintain some semblance of integrity or moderate empowerment. It may be a failed system, but it's our failed system, or so the logic would go. Maybe, as Jeanette Winterson suggests in her novel The Stone Gods, it's that capitalism is like Japanese knotweed. Because it is so ingrained within the culture of modern society, whether it be in the media, in academia, on the high street, or as shown, embedded in politics and history, we can't freely extricate ourselves from it, and are in fact fatally resigned to participate. Along this line of thought, is it possible that so-called millennials like us are living in what Marxists would call a false consciousness? Having only known the success of the capitalist system, have we been misled into believing in something which is actually against our interests? One could even go as far as wondering whether the current system has even allowed us to consider the alternatives, such as its vice-like grip on media outlets and cultural production. Has our social imagination been entirely corroded by capitalist realism? By this way of thinking, we can't imagine a world without capitalism, or expunge it from our makeup, because it is the only social experience of our lifetime. Clearly then, envisioning, let alone actually implementing an economic system aside from the form of neoliberal capitalism that dominates today is tough. There are alternatives out there though, should we look far enough. After years of being what the New York Times called an economic basket case, Bolivia has seen impressive and consistent economic growth under the socialist leadership of Evo Morales, and received praise from such unlikely sources as the World Bank and the IMF. Popular revolt led Morales' government to seize back previously private-owned industries such as oil and gas. This, combined with Morales' other socio-economic reforms, has had a dramatic effect. Poverty has declined by 25%, social spending has increased by more than 45%, and the real minimum wage has increased by 87.7%. Furthermore, the Economic Commission on Latin America and the Caribbean has recognized Bolivia for being one of the few countries that has reduced inequality. Though there have been bumps in the road, what Morales has achieved is somewhat remarkable. In the face of conventional wisdom that says left-wing policies damage economic growth, that working-class people can't run successful economies, and that politics can't be transformative, Bolivia has, well, transformed. Despite opposition from the US and IMF, Bolivia has grown much faster over the last 8 years than in any period over the past 3.5 decades.
Other socialist-leaning models also exist. Professor David Schweikart's model of economic democracy, for example, which he expounds upon in his book After Capitalism, has achieved moderate renown. Said system socializes control of enterprises and the means of production, placing resources, factories, and other productive capital into the hands of the people and away from the short-term interests of both the state and the private sector. Here is Schweikart explaining how such a system could be born out of another financial crisis.
So, for example, imagine another financial crisis. Imagine that the U.S. didn't step in and bail out the banks back in 2008. Imagine that the stock market collapsed. Imagine that the banking system collapsed. And imagine that at that time there was an election and a political party was there that had an alternative vision. What would they do? Well, first of all, the stock market has collapsed. The individual shares of all those publicly traded companies would be almost worthless. So the state could easily say, we'll buy them all. Well, we would pay higher than they're worth, so you've got nothing to complain about. Okay. Suddenly, the government owns, the major corporations, in the society. Okay, you've got them. Now, turn them over to the workers. Be run democratically. Set up some guidelines. You can keep the managers you have right now, or you can elect new ones. You have to set up a worker council, and so on. You've democratized the commanding heights of your economy.
Under this transparent and egalitarian model of workplace democracy and protectionism, an economic system devoid of risky financial speculation, we would apparently be immune to the sorts of crises that hit in 2008.
That said, not all capitalist economies brutally faltered in 2008. If capitalism is to stay as one of the few countries that continued to thrive during that time, Sweden's model stands out as a version to emulate. After ranking as the fourth richest country in the world in 1970, Sweden experienced a severe financial crisis in the early 1990s. At this time, many expected the Swedish welfare state to collapse and for the country to return to its days as a state highly influenced by social democracy and anti-capitalist policies. Sweden, however, did not dismantle the social system, but, in addition to drastically reducing its costs, adopted macroeconomic and structural reforms to make it sustainable. With well-defined property rights, efficient government institutions, low corruption, and low taxation on internationally mobile capital, Sweden quickly recovered and learned from the crisis. Now, thanks to its integration of a social welfare society with a free market economy, Sweden is a cultural haven and perhaps best represents cuddly capitalism as opposed to the cutthroat Anglo-American model. For its success in combining prosperity and equality, The Economist recently described Sweden as a North Star and a supermodel. The Washington Post, meanwhile, called Sweden the rock star of recovery after the 2008 financial crisis. Evidently, as an example that well-functioning capitalism can exist, the case of Sweden can provide important lessons as we move forward and negotiate our attachment to the neoliberal capitalist model.
Ever since the 2008 financial crisis, there has been somewhat of a shift in ideological atmosphere, a subtle reawakening of our social imagination. In recent years, we've witnessed growing discontent with the current neoliberal capitalist model. High unemployment, economics of austerity, and the continuation of the status quo have brought about mass mobilization, such as the global Occupy movement. We are at least appearing to imagine that we can imagine an economic model beyond what we live with now.
Given this progress, it will now be interesting to monitor what it will take to stimulate real change in the Anglo-American model, if any is permitted. Will it be largely peaceful, with a political party winning a majority of the electorate and securing positions at all levels of government before passing laws and executive orders that would redefine the system?
Current signs seem to point towards the expansion of a counter-hegemonic community within the existing order, a force that would demand a mixed system, with an eye towards ultimately supplanting capitalism. Of course, There could yet be a revolutionary insurrection at a time of truly devastating crisis. Whether it be brought on by economic disaster, war, or because of ecological factors, a dramatic reorganisation could potentially occur. As shown, there are a number of obstacles hindering our collective imagining of a future beyond the current Anglo-American model of neoliberal capitalism. Given the current circumstances, however, the obvious inequality all around us, the staggering quantity of cultural output, and the mounting level of public outcry, perhaps there is hope for the future. Maybe, just maybe, our crisis will make the seemingly impossible, a move away from capitalism, inevitable.
This world ends, this world ends, this world ends, this world ends The people united will never be defeated, and on the people's might just forever be repeated. New streets, our streets, it'll never be deleted, no matter how many cops that you send to try and beat it, huh? This is revolution in the making, a ragtag movement set to take over the nation. Now isn't that fun? We just want to make the world better, isn't that young? Wow. Blessings to the youth then, and don't stop until they let the truth in. And once it's there, never let it leave, and protect it there, catch it, and never set it free. I never said it's free, blood, sweat, and tears, no place I'd rather be. So, let's occupy Wall Street, all day, all week. This world ends, this world